Okay, Billy, so tell me a little bit about your story. I understand your father was in the service.
Yes, I'm sort of here as an after what is the aftermath of war, and my father, Corporal William H. Myers Jr., who was from Lansdowne, Pennsylvania, was with the 571st Anti-Aircraft Automatic Weapons Third Army, I believe it is, and Bill didn't really want to go to war, like so many people at that age don't really want to go, but he didn't want to shirk his duties, and so there he left his wife and went off to Europe. And what followed thereafter was a sense of adventure of seeing England and seeing France, and he loved Holland, and he even loved Germany. So that's kind of fulfilled, and it's interesting that in his letters, as he talks about the coldest winter on record, he said in his letters that it was a bit cold, so I grew a Van Dyke, but don't tell Mom. And or I'm sleeping with the chickens tonight, and somewhere in Germany or somewhere in France or somewhere in Holland. And he did find that Holland by far was one of the favorite countries that he loved. He loved the people, and he stayed with the family there. Unfortunately, because of the censorship, I never found out who the family was. But he would write letters and saying, "Can you please bring over the fruit cup? The family loves fruit cup." And as you probably know, back then, the Dutch in particular were really being starved to death. So,
Well, tell me a little bit, just to back up for one moment. He's writing letters to your mom. Did you have brothers and sisters as well? Who was he writing letters to?
no, he was writing it to his wife, his mother and father, his sister, and several cousins that he grew up with. Yeah.
And you were born after.
Yes,
I don't want to.
certainly. What happened was on February 3rd, 1945, my father was killed in action a little village outside of Aachen, Germany. He knew that my mother was pregnant, and he had asked that if the baby was a boy, if we could please keep the family name of William H. Myers III. If it was a girl, he would leave it up to my mother. So on July 18th, 1945, I was born, and my mother named me after my father and her, which in some ways I'm their small memorial because my mother died 5 years later of Hodgkin's.
Who raised you?
My paternal grandparents. And I must say that it's interesting the stories that they would tell about my father as a boy, but was even more interesting that I would be out, not necessarily in a family function, but remember that I was born after my father was killed, and we would be at some party or whatever reception, and someone would say to me, "Are you Bill Myers' daughter?" And I said, "Well, I'm his granddaughter." And they said, "No, not senior, junior." And I said, "Well, yes, I am, but how did you know?" And they said, "You have the same smile, the same laugh, the same mannerisms as your father." So there's things that just seem genetic. I also bite my nails like my father, and I could kill him for that one. But yeah, that's how I got my name, and that's
And obviously, you never met your dad, but you learned a lot about him from your grandparents and I'm guessing from his letters. Is that correct?
that's true. That's very true.
So tell me what it was like to, or at what age were you aware that there were letters from the service?
Well, I always knew there were letters, but you have to understand something. When you're a kid growing up, the most important thing is playing outside with your friends or going to the movies. It wasn't until I got older, and in fact, I moved to London, and I said to my roommate, "I need to go to Margraten," and that's where my father is interred at the American Military Cemetery in Margraten, Holland. My roommate didn't even question. In fact, to this day, she said she remembers every moment about that trip and how honored she was to go with me. I wanted to prove that my father existed. And I think any child who, you go through stages saying, "Well, was I adopted? Did he really exist?" And and I can honestly say that I said it was the first time my father and I were together. So that was back in 1967, and lo and behold, I become a member of the American World War II Orphans Network. And from there, I get to meet other orphans, and especially those whose father are buried in Margraten. Unbeknownst to me, in 1967, the Dutch adopt each soldier's grave, and I found out who the adopters were for my father, and it was the Van Pol family. And later on, Teenie, whose grandmother had adopted my father's grave and died, the adoption committee asked if she wanted to continue with that, and she said, yes, I would. So I got to meet Teenie and Josper Henny. And to this day, they're like members of the family, and she'll send me a note, and she said, we stopped by and said hi to Bill today. So that is one of the things that I've always said to people. The Dutch instill each of their children the importance of freedom and to honor those 8,301 soldiers buried in that cemetery. So I can honestly tell you that when I'm in Holland and they see this button and they kind of know why we're there, it's always thank you for my freedom. And I always say the last time I was there in a restaurant was the waitress said to my husband, oh, are you on holiday? And he said, no, actually we're here. My father-in-law, my wife's father, is buried in Margraten. And with tears in her eyes, she comes over to me and says, I'm so sorry, I didn't know. Thank you for my freedom. So that's my story.
Well, yeah, I didn't know there was a network of orphans. That's really fascinating to me. I
Yeah.
guess thinking about it, there would obviously have to be quite a large potential network of people.
Yes, and what I was really amazed, the ones that I meet who have adopted the soldier's grave, for example, there was an older Jewish man who I knew. He had a yarmulke on, and he's there with the Star of David, and he's putting the stone and saying a prayer and the blessing. And I said to him, I knew he was Dutch, and I said, oh, dank u wel. And he said, alsjeblieft, but why? And I said, because you're honoring that soldier. And he said, he's my boy, and they always look at them as their boys. And even the young feel the same way. And Memorial Day is not a Dutch holiday, but every year on Memorial Day, they have this ceremony that thousands come with bouquets of flowers, and they have a concert, and the Queen was there the last time we were there. And in 2015, which probably will be the last the group of the A1 members will go, because we are getting up in age. But they plan to have so many celebrities, and maybe the Queen will be, I shouldn't say the Queen, because then it's now her son who's the king. But they always honor our fathers. That I'm so amazed. They're not thinking about opening the swimming pool or the barbecues. They're there to honor those who gave them freedom. So
They got it right.
yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Anything else you'd want to say? I mean, now you're all wired up here, or anything that I know we have to ask.
No, I think that's my story, and there's so many of them out there, but I always say I'm what happens after the war. And you're always searching for your father, but at least I know where he is, and hopefully my mother and father are proud of me.